All right, very good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on what is a fairly dreary morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chelsea Heyman. I am the Director of Housing Policy and Programs for the Maryland Department of Disabilities. This is our annual Property Manager Case Manager meeting. Once upon a time, before the pandemic, we did these in person. And since the pandemic, we've shifted to entirely virtual, which I think is pretty beneficial, primarily because we've been able to get some really great speakers like Dr. Teresa, who's going to be presenting to us today from Richmond, Virginia. So we're able to have people from other parts of the country present to us here. So that's great. So this morning, we're going to have a presentation on Dr. Teresa's article, The Financialization of Housing. I did link this article in the initial invite that went out via Constant Contact to really anyone on our mailing list. However, I'm going to go ahead and put the link as well in the chat. So that way you all can take a look at that and refer to it as Dr. Teresa is giving us his presentation. In addition, I'm going to also link his website as well for those of you who want to learn a little bit more about his research interests and how that relates to the article that he'll be talking about today. So just a quick intro on Dr. Teresa. He is the Associate Professor and Co-Director of the RVA Eviction Lab and an Assistant Professor in the Urban and Regional Studies and Planning Program at Virginia Commonwealth University. Most of his research is dedicated to exploring the role of financialization in urban change. This is particularly of interest to people on this call because all of us work within the housing sphere, whether that be on the property management end, working in buildings that are low-income housing tax credit buildings with 811 units, or if you're working directly with clients who are trying to apply for affordable housing. This is going to be a very interesting presentation. We'll add some context to the work that you're doing. So without further ado, I'll let Dr. Teresa go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you so much for this invitation. It's wonderful for me to be with you all today. So I look forward to the conversation. Chelsea, I noticed that it would be possible for me to share my screen. I do have a few slides.
Yes, it is. Let's see.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to, I think if I make you a co-host, it should allow you to share the screen.
That works.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as Chelsea mentioned, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you all about today is based on this introduction to in Shelter Force, an introduction to a series of articles that look at specific housing problems, and they're all based around this idea or this process of what is called the financialization of housing. So I'm going to describe what that is and what its implications are for affordable housing, for housing markets, and for broader community development. So obviously, in the past couple of years through the pandemic, there's been a really wild ride in terms of housing and rents and what's been happening in housing markets, as I'm sure we're all aware. So early on in the pandemic, for example, in 2020, there was plummeting rents, but that wasn't evenly felt across all housing markets. So people who were mobile, who could work from home, did move, while other people who have fewer choices were not able to move. And so rents kind of moved in opposite directions. And then once things started opening back again, more recently, we've seen a dramatic increase in rents. And of course, we saw a run up in home prices right before the Federal Reserve started to increase interest rates and push mortgage rates higher. At the same time, there's also been an influx of investor owners buying single family homes, further kind of complicating the housing market picture. So again, we can see, particularly in the last couple of years, a brief drop in rents, not evenly felt across markets, but definitely a drop in some markets, and then a surge in rents that at this point seem to be tapering a little bit. And similarly, there's been an uptick, as I was saying, in investor purchases of single family homes across the country in the last couple of years. And so obviously there's a lot going on and a lot of different explanations. Obviously the pandemic has played a role in these transformations in the last couple of years. But what I want to make the case for you all today is that we should look at what's happened in the last couple of years across a much longer time period, go back historically to understand how markets were shaped in this way. And I'm going to make the case that financialization, which I'll explain in a minute, offer a definition for, really is part of a long-term transformation of the economy, which certainly affects housing markets. So what do I mean by financialization? In the context of housing, really what we're talking about is the integration of real estate and financial markets. Those two types of markets have not always been so tightly intermingled as they are today. And there's a history of policy change for how that was facilitated over decades. I won't talk about so much about the second and third sort of explanations for this transformation and how it's affected housing markets. But of course, it's very important to note how decreasing support, particularly at the federal level, for affordable housing production and preservation has affected housing affordability and our current state of housing markets. And finally, increasing inequality in labor markets, so particularly low and falling wages at the low end, has exacerbated housing problems. So as I said, when we talk about financialization is simply about the increasing role of financial actors and institutions in parts of economy and our society more broadly, in ways that they weren't active before. So, one example is a good case to illustrate this is GE, GE, maker of appliances and jet engines, kind of the paragon of an industrial corporation that makes things. Prior to the 2008 housing crisis, 40% of GE's profits came from real estate loans, from home mortgage loans. GE had a arm called GE Capital that originated home loans, and that process of lending money, finance, constituted 40% of all of GE's profits. So here's an industrial corporation who's makes products, and yet a very large share of its profitability in that period of time came from actually financial activities rather than product creating activities. So more specifically for housing markets, though, we might think of financialization as how do real estate markets and financial markets become more tightly intertwined, and what does that mean? Why is that important? So when we talk about the effect that bringing financial markets ever closer to property markets, one of the features of financial markets, of course, is that there's a lot of very different types of assumptions and risk-taking than might be seen just in the real estate sector alone. So this means higher risk investment strategies, higher risk loans with higher interest rates, and other financial products that are tied to those loans that are riskier. And what this risk introduces into housing markets and property markets more generally is more market volatility. What that means is property markets begin to act more like the stock market. That means there's higher highs, lower lows. Those kinds of crises are more frequent and more severe. So if you think about the last 20 or 30 years in housing markets, there's been several major crises. Obviously, the housing crisis, foreclosure crisis of 2008 being one of the key ones, which I'll talk a little bit more in the next few minutes. Additionally, one of the imperatives in financial markets is consistently seeking out quarter after quarter growth and higher returns. Now, in housing, if you're consistently seeking out higher and higher returns, this is going to increase housing costs. If you're demanding increased profitability from housing markets, then what this means is that rents and prices are going to need to rise to produce that level of profitability. Very quickly, I'll just round out talking about austerity and privatization. So as federal support for public housing and affordable housing has declined over time, we've lost our stock of deeply affordable housing. So public housing being, one of the only significant stocks for very low income households. I'm thinking 30% of AMI and lower. Obviously, there are other routes to providing outside of public housing for providing that kind of support, but the scale of federal support is dramatically smaller than it has been, at least in the 20th century. And as also the policy orientation has shifted from public support to kind of privatization and private-public partnerships, that has also led to a loss of public control over affordable housing production and really preservation. So as we've moved to a model of encouraging private investment for affordable housing, this comes with all sorts of expiring use restrictions that then have to be managed in the years that follow the construction of the affordable housing. Finally, increasing inequality in labor markets. So what do we mean here? Over the last 40 years or so, low or no wage growth or very low wage growth at the bottom, which means that people at the bottom of housing markets face increasing cost burdens. Conversely, at the top of the labor market, you have increasing shares of income, and really housing markets, private housing markets, unsubsidized markets are going to respond to and going to build for the most profitable segments first. And so as inequality expands, it takes more time for the market to actually fill the lowest gap, lowest segment of the market, if it ever gets there. Also, I want to just highlight, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but I'm happy to talk more about it, the effects of decades of mass incarceration policy and then tenant screening policies mean that people will have fewer and fewer choices. And I think that this really can't be discounted. While overall, most people will not have contact with the criminal justice system in specific neighborhoods. Of course, we understand that mass incarceration plays a significant role in communities' lives. And so following that criminal record around really very much constrains people's future housing searches. Okay, coming back to financialization, and I want to focus a little bit more on the history of financialization, and in particular, how did real estate markets, property markets, and financial markets become intertwined? And historically, how has that been managed over time? So if we come back to the era of the Great Depression, which is, I think, one place to really start to put the pieces together. Prior to the Great Depression, real estate and property markets were very similar to the way they are today. They were very intertwined. And so investors, investment banks could lend in property markets, although there was no home mortgage market like there is today. In terms of being able to get a 30-year loan. So what that meant was that housing was was volatile. And so every 3 or 5 years, you had to refinance your home loan. And so one of what's been identified as one of the factors leading to the stock market crash of 1929 and really the resulting unemployment and massive home foreclosure that was the experience in the Great Depression. One of the key things is that when the stock market crashed, this meant that the property market was going to crash. So speculation in financial markets was directly tied to the fortunes of property markets, and this was a disaster for housing markets in the Great Depression. So there was a set of reforms in the 1930s, New Deal era reforms. And so the Great Depression, as I've mentioned, obviously massive loss in employment and economic decline, massive waves of home foreclosures, and of course, banking failures from banks holding loans on homes that were being foreclosed and other types of assets that were no longer valuable in the Depression. And so the policy that was pursued was then to separate property markets from investment and financial markets. So the idea was we need a functioning banking system to support home ownership, to support investment in cities and in property and building. But financial speculation, stock markets, those activities are too risk prone, are too volatile to have direct involvement in housing markets. And so that's where we get things like out of this era, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage with a low down payment backed by the federal government, standardized mortgage underwriting guidelines provided by the FHA, and a whole set of other types of banking, deposit insurance, and support for the banking system that facilitates home mortgages, home construction, multifamily construction. And so it was really rebuilding a banking system to facilitate housing construction and home ownership, separate from the financial markets, capital markets, the stock market. What are some of the other key moments in this history of financialization after we move through the Great Depression and the New Deal era reforms? Really beginning in the 1970s, but several key moments in the 1980s is where this separation between the banking system that I was describing to support housing, separated from financial markets and stock markets. This is beginning where that separation is kind of dismantled piece by piece over a couple of decades. So the first thing that happens in the 1980s is that savings and loans institutions and other banks and other lending institutions are deregulated in the sense that they no longer have caps on the interest rates that they can charge for loans. So for example, this facilitates eventually the rise of subprime mortgage lending. So home loans that carry adjustable rates, interest rates over prime. These are things that were all banks could not do by law prior to this period. It also expanded the types of assets that banks could lend to. So no longer were savings and loans institutions, for example, which provided most of home mortgage finance up until this point, no longer were they limited to financing owner-occupant home mortgages, but they could invest in oil production, and they could invest in office construction and all types of property investments. And so this further kind of expanded the types of loans they would lend and the types of investments that they would lend to. Crucially, in this period of time, we also see In the secondary mortgage market, so this is where the government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are involved. And this is where they begin to innovate new types of financial products in the secondary markets that are based on mortgage payments. And here what happens is they develop new types of financial products that basically match investors in capital markets with these types of mortgage payments. So they create investments that investors on the stock market will be interested in investing in, all to get more lending coming into home mortgages. But what's important about this is that it begins to deepen the connection, your marketing, deepen the connection between housing markets and financial markets. You're beginning to market financial products based on home loan payments into financial markets. Additionally, a lot of tax policy was changed in the 1980s. You know, obviously we get the low-income housing tax credit coming out of various tax reform bills in the 1980s. Additionally, the IRS changes its policies, and the limited liability corporation has a more favorable tax treatment. And so this becomes the vehicle of choice increasingly after the 1980s for real estate investors. Basically, all of these changes in the 1980s increases risk-taking and market volatility in housing markets and property markets. And so by the late 1980s, early 1990s, we have the savings and loan crisis. So savings and loan institutions are over-leveraged, they're holding loans that are not being repaid, and it's a massive crisis. And the result is something called the Resolution Trust Corporation, where the federal government opens investments into these failing banks to private investors like Colony Capital. And Colony Capital is important because about 30 years later, so this is happening in the early 1990s, about 30 years later, Colony Capital becomes Starwood Capital Group, which is an owner of about 30,000 single-family rental homes. And so what I'm suggesting to you is, right, the savings and loan crisis and the kinds of new connections it makes between housing and investors and financial markets through the Resolution Trust Corporation carries forward for the next several decades. This becomes also important in the 2008 crisis, housing crisis and foreclosure crisis, where a lot of foreclosed homes come to be owned by banks, but also by the government-sponsored enterprises as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And what they do with many of the foreclosed homes is, again, sell them to private investors as a strategy for keeping banks solvent, for keeping foreclosed homes off the federal government's balance sheets. But it empowers a set of private market investors to become significant owners of housing and who are interested in housing, again, for this kind of investment potential as financial assets. And so what happens with kind of this history of financialization is I think we see at least 3 types of investor-led transformations of housing markets over the past 20 or 30 years. And here are kind of the 3 types, and there certainly doesn't capture everything, but I think it gives you a picture of what is financialization done, like what are the implications for it on the ground. So the first thing that's happened over the past 20 years is in expensive markets like New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, right? You have increasing investor interest in buying multifamily housing with the expectation of increasing rents. The second transformation in weaker markets, particularly in the industrial Midwest, is you've had a resurgence of what's called contract selling or contract for deed purchases, which is historically a predatory practice, very much based in kind of a racial discrimination. And this is not a typical home sale, but basically is a rent to own. And we can talk more about, the potential or challenges of rent to own. But in these cases, it's really being used to market previously foreclosed homes to buyers and renters who have poor credit histories and who have really very few choices in the housing market. And then finally, which has certainly gotten a lot of attention, particularly coming out of the pandemic, or in the last year or so of the pandemic, is increasing investor ownership of single-family homes, and in particular, the creation of single-family rental markets, which was, as I indicated earlier, very much connected to the 2008 financial crisis and how the federal government decided to deal with the glut of foreclosed homes by involving private investors. So what have been some of the effects of these three kind of market types, or these three types of transformations in housing markets? Well, in those expensive cities, for example, that I was mentioning, like New York City, certainly DC would be relevant here, San Francisco and others, as I mentioned. Investors purchase these buildings for very high prices because the expectation of rent increase is very high. And so that means if you're successful and you, by meeting those expectations, this leads to, of course, rent increases, in many cases, encouraging tenant turnover, so oftentimes through harassment or even illegal practices, to be able to turn over units to charge increasing rates. And even if in some cases, in these examples, in these types of expensive markets, those expectations weren't met. So those investors were not able to increase rents as fast as they had anticipated. And this also causes severe problems if once a landlord, an investor owner, is not able to pay a mortgage, the building may go into foreclosure, which of course causes a whole other set of problems with building deterioration, and cycling through investors. Particularly in places like New York City, housing conditions in these types of investments are frequently poor and exacerbated by this type of investment. And so that's something important to note about this type of investment. It also spurred a lot of activism to suggest we need the right kind of investment in multifamily housing, not investment that treats buildings like stocks or bonds that inevitably rise and produce returns for investors, but as actual long-term, stable, and affordable housing. That second case that I was referring to was the practice of contract selling. Now, contract selling has an important history in urban history, and in particular in the civil rights movement. So if we recall Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final years of his life after his activism in the South and expanding political participation and voting rights for Black Americans, he spent the last couple of years of his life in the North. Because for the civil rights movement, and for Dr. King in particular, the civil rights movement was not over until economic inclusion and full participation, not just in the political system, but full participation in the economic system was also imperative. And the civil and for leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, inclusion into the economy, or sort of full participation in society by Black people and African Americans would not be complete until they had full inclusion in the economy. And so he spent his life the last year or so before he went to Memphis for the sanitation workers strike, he spent it on the west side of Chicago, living in slum housing to draw attention to the practices of contract selling, which basically the seller enters into a contract with the buyer that says, once you complete this schedule of payments, often 20 or 30 years, like a home mortgage, only after you complete every one of these payments does the title, the deed, actually transfer. So the home ownership doesn't occur until the end of the period, rather than in a normal mortgage purchase situation, right? You become the legal owner, even though might be mortgaged, the home might be mortgaged. This was used as a tool of racial transition in the 50s and 60s in cities like Chicago, where a growing Black middle class had very few housing choices due to racial discrimination, and could not get through redlining and racial discrimination in mortgage lending, could not get a home mortgage. And so these alternative financing arrangements, which were much more expensive and predatory because you could lose the home even after you had completed your payments, even if you miss one payment, you can lose the home. And so that's historically where contract selling comes from. But in the since 2008, this practice, we've seen a resurgence in some key markets, like in Chicago or other cities in the Midwest, and particularly in majority Black neighborhoods, Cleveland, Youngstown. And we see concentrations of this type of contract selling, as I'm suggesting, in the Midwest, and also in some Black neighborhoods in places like Atlanta and Memphis as well. So there's a lot, of course, to say, and I'm happy to take questions on anything or land contracts in particular. But here, what I want to get across to you is that the resurgence of contract selling post-2008 is directly related to the federal government placing foreclosed homes for sale to these large national investors. And so this is where they really tap into this market and offer these homes for sale on contract. And so in Chicago, for example, you see concentrations of contract selling on its west sides and south sides, historically Black neighborhoods, and expanding into the south suburbs as well. In both periods, in the 50s and 60s, as well as in the current era, of course, these practices have inspired a lot of activism and resistance to these types of practices, which is important to note for policy change and broader reform. Okay, finally, I want to turn to single-family rental markets and how investors have reshaped those markets. So just as contract selling comes out of the 2008 financial crisis, housing crisis, and foreclosure crisis, so does the rise of the single-family rental markets. Although this geography is different, it's focused primarily in the Sun Belt, where there are, of course, many single-family homes. The Sun Belt was also hard hit by the foreclosure crisis after 2008. So there were a lot of foreclosed homes in these neighborhoods, which then investors were able to purchase. And instead of purchasing those for owner occupancy, for home ownership, those were converted into rentals. And while at the nation overall, these large type of financial investors in single family markets, they don't own a lot of housing, single family housing at the scale of the whole nation, but that's really what's relevant is how much do they own in a particular neighborhood? Because when you conduct a search for housing, right, if you're looking for an apartment, you're not looking across the nation, you're looking in a neighborhood or two, and you're looking for something quite specific, like a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment. And at that scale, at that market scale, at the neighborhood where people are actually conducting their housing searches, in places like Atlanta, these owners, in some cases, own a third or 40% of all single family housing in these neighborhoods, which conveys them a great deal of market power. And how have they used that market power? Well, they've rewritten boilerplate lease agreements to include lots of additional fees, and shift a lot of costs from owners to renters. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up now in the next couple minutes, and then I'm happy to take questions and have discussion. So obviously, to review what I've been kind of talking about here, right, is that we should think of current problems in housing as part of a long-term economic transformation related to, one, financialization, the integration of real estate and financial markets in particular. The second is housing austerity and privatization. And third is increasing inequality. And so what are some of the implications, as I've been kind of describing these three different cases and the effects? Well, obviously, what I'm arguing for is that as housing is changing, that is related to our broader economic picture, our broader economic changes, and our policy orientations, which are, of course, also related to economic change. In particular, as labor markets have changed, so has housing tenure. As people's wages have stagnated, that means housing burdens, cost burdens have increased. As inequality has increased, that makes it much more difficult for market development to actually respond to the needs of a very unequal society. Increasing instability in these types of markets means that those companies, investors that do own housing have to manage this type of volatility and instability. And often the way they do that is by passing risk and cost on to tenants, communities, and local governments, whether that's through dealing with foreclosures, abandoned homes, redistributing risk through the types of changes in lease agreements that I was describing, or through just changing the tenure altogether through contract sales. These are all strategies to deal with instability in housing markets, which is itself produced through this kind of orientation of housing as financial investment. And so this does result in kind of a proliferation of unaffordable housing, deteriorates housing conditions, unstable. So those large owners are also on average higher evictors than smaller, less professional landlords. And of course, these have distinct racial lines to them. And so it's important to keep a note that these effects are not felt evenly across our residents, our neighbors as well. And so that's why really it's important to think about, the work that we all do, or this is my argument that I'm making, that I think it's important to situate the work we do in this broader conversation about economic change and how that relates to how housing has changed and the way that we live. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much, and I look forward to questions and conversation.
All right, very good. Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate that presentation. Very thorough, and I think gives participants a lot to think about. So I did have two people in the Q&A ask about getting a copy of the PowerPoint. Is that
I'm happy to share that. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great.
That's an easy question.
That's an easy question, yeah. Let's see here. I do have a person who has their hand raised, Dr. Katrina Folks. I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself so you can ask your question. You should be able.
Thank you so much. First, I want to say thank you so much, Ben and Chelsea, for even having this, because it's such a great deal right now with our coming out of the pandemic and people are losing their homes, and it's just been a really hard situation. And my question as a case manager and an agent for HUD for the 811 program for housing, do you ever see an opportunity for people who credit They have everything else. They have the finances. They have everything else lined up. But because they have been in the bind during the pandemic, losing loved ones that helped supplemented their income, which caused them to have hardship, things of that nature. Is there a way that people are able to be more open to the credit issue out here that is going on with millions of people? How could we address that, or how could we petition or see of a change when it comes to the credit portion that is mandated for a lot of people to be able to be home buyers and things of that nature? How would we go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Thank you, Dr. Folks, for that. Related to credit. So, I identified correctly about what a crisis like the pandemic has on people's household finances. And the 2008 crisis similarly really damaged household finances. If you had a foreclosure, or even if you lost a job, these kinds of crises do long-term damage to people's credit and household finances. So, building back credit for home ownership is a long-term proposition. And so I think there are different models that I'm aware of, and maybe others on the call, are familiar with some as well. And so this is, related to kind of the contract selling and rent to own question. So rent to own is not in of itself bad. So for example, in Richmond, our community land trust, the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, has a pilot program that is a rent to own, but for home buyers who are not able to purchase yet. And those are often questions of credit, a credit history question. And so what the rent to own arrangement allows them to do in a non-predatory, stable way is for them to pay rent, and a portion of that rent is then held for a down payment in a year or two, once the credit has been built, to use towards a down payment to buy the house. And so there are programs that can focus on that kind of credit building. They're way too small scale at this point to reach everyone who needs that. I also think that I'll just make one more point, because I think there's another question coming out. One more point is that I think that there should be some type of restriction on how credit histories can be used in housing searches alongside criminal histories, because these are often used. I mean, the research shows that often screening will eliminate people for housing for any type of record, even if it was ultimately in their favor. Like if they had an eviction judgment that was dismissed because it was resolved or it was in error, then it doesn't matter, because the way the screening is often conducted is that person is just eliminated without really understanding what the context was. And so for a pandemic where so many people are being affected, kind of using what happened to people in the crisis as a screening tool, I think really needs some further limitations.
Is it possible we can also, in addition, get a copy of the PowerPoint, but also get copies of house and rent to own properties for the state of Maryland? Do you have that access? Because I have several people that are in great need, and I've been trying to prevent homelessness. Even though their rent has been paid up, they're not getting renewed because they've had hardship. And I am trying to find something for them where so they can eventually own the property, but I don't have listings, and I've been trying to work with real estate agents regarding this matter.
Sure, I'm happy to. Unfortunately, I don't have a very detailed knowledge of Maryland resources, but I'm happy to share kind of what's going on in Richmond. And in full disclosure, my wife is the CEO of the land trust in Richmond here, so I will be happy to share with you, their program and how they're approaching it.
Yeah, so I know in Maryland we have, there's a couple of community land trusts that exist in different areas. So, and it varies widely, like how big they are and how much they cover in terms of like the houses that are part of the land of the community land trust. And for those of you not familiar with community land trusts, essentially, just to really briefly summarize what they do, but it's land that's held in a trust, and the land, typically there's housing on that land, and it's intended to keep that housing affordable for homeowners who are at lower income levels to be able to eventually purchase these houses. So I'm happy to provide a list of the ones that I'm familiar with in the state, to anyone who might be interested in learning more. I think we had somebody else had a question in the chat. Or Gina Epps had a comment. While not taking care of the credit piece directly, this might be helpful in some cases in removing this barrier. So, okay, great. Christina, I'm gonna unmute you.
Oh, I think I have to unmute myself too. So I just had one question kind of following up with purchasing homes. Do you think individuals or families are viewing purchasing a home as a bad investment now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how people are viewing it. I think obvious what's happening now is just mortgage rates have gone up so dramatically, so quickly that, a home that would have sold, for example, for $400,000, if you bought a home, a year ago at the mortgage rates at $400,000, for you to have the same monthly payment, that house now would have to sell for less than $300,000 at the current mortgage rates. And so I think what's happened is, and you can see this also in kind of the new home construction data, is the interest rate situation has just really shut down the home sale market, and also unfortunately the housing construction market. I think that people probably still aspire to be homeowners and to have that stability and sort of aspire to what homeownership in its ideal form gives you: stability, privacy, and long-term wealth building. I think people still aspire to those things. Unfortunately, I think homeownership as it currently configured doesn't always give those things to everyone. And so I think that's the challenge right now, because we're in a moment where things are switching from a low interest rate scenario to a higher one.
In addition, you have to, even when you get inspectors to come and inspect your home, it's not until you really live in the home to find out that you have all of this like people have cut corners, and you have the home warranty who don't want to pay, and then you have the home insurance that you have to go through. It's just such a hassle. And, it's like really needed to be educated on. People are telling you, you don't need that inspector. Yes, you need those inspectors. And how about get plumbers to come out to make sure that the plumbing is working and the electrical outlet, get an electrician to come out. And people think, okay, that's a waste of money, but it really isn't, because it happened to me and my husband. We put a lot of money into a home that looked good on the outside, was completely gutted out and redone, but then to find out that they didn't use sealant around pipes and had gushes of water going through the walls, and remediation having to take place. And it's a lot that goes into your home. And so people have to be really educated on how to even maintain their home, what to do before they even go into the home. It's a lot there. And to have money saved and set to the side so you won't be homeless while you're trying to fix the things that have been left in your pocket, in your lap from the prior owners.
Yeah,
It's you know,
sure.
it's bittersweet, but because we love our home, it's just the money that we've had to come out to put into our home and
Yeah,
wanting to purchase new property, but not able to right now because money feels like it's been wasted.
yeah. It's tough, definitely. I do want to move on to another question from Carol Taliaferro. Do you see an increase in homeowners who own their homes but are at risk of losing their homes due to tax sales to real estate investors? Are there any programs to assist with this issue?
Right. So I do think this kind of connects with the discussion just a second ago, which was particularly in cities like Richmond, and I'm sure of it in Maryland as well. There was a sizable middle class Black homeownership sector that was built in the decades after, from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And many of these households, the matriarch, still owns the home and lives in it. And yet they are on, fixed income, perhaps Social Security or some type of fixed income. And so to meet those obligations of property tax and home upkeep, which are, important, but it's not something that all families in that situation and households in that situation can do. There's also the related question, which is perhaps the, original grandparent has died. And so there's actually the property, often these properties are held in a family trust. And so then it becomes a question of what are the children going to do with it? And the title is muddied. And this is where, unfortunately, you get a lot of these actors that search out titles that are unclear and delinquent properties that are delinquent on their property tax payments. And they try to entice to sell, or they even just try to, if it is actually in arrears and the sale is going up, which I think was the original question, if the tax lien sale is going forward, then they might actually at auction try to take control of the property. So, I mean, this spans, I'm sure you see those little signs, "We buy homes," posted everywhere. I've gotten solicitations by text for my home, and others have in my neighborhood. So it's a real concern. And so I do think that some important policy innovations for, property tax relief for senior citizens, for low income homeowners are appropriate, and other kinds of programs that can help keep their homes in a good condition. And then other campaigns so that people have the knowledge they need when they receive these calls that are like, I can give you $175,000 next week in cash for your home. But that 175 is actually below assessed value, even if the home is in poor condition. But anyone who gets a call, or many people who get a call for 175 in my hand next week, that's not an offer that people can always be in a position to refuse. And so I think that, no one should be paying below assessed value for, receiving it below assessed value for the home, even in this market, So I think kind of pairing, property tax relief for these types alongside a campaign that can really help, long-term homeowners deal with what in some neighborhoods is really an onslaught of this type of buy homes for cash type of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know in Maryland, there are some for homeowners who are lower income, there is the homeowners property tax credit that I believe every year you have to reapply to that, but that's used a lot by older adults, especially in cities like Baltimore, where, you know, very similar to Richmond, like you said. And there was some legislation, and I'm looking that up now, actually. I'm trying to pull up that information regarding tax sale. And I can put that in the chat, but there were some changes to the tax sale process in Baltimore City and what was allowable. That's primarily where we see issues, you know, of individuals losing their home to investors. I was wondering, I'm looking for other questions, but Ben, how do you feel about the impact of this trend in single family homes? How does this affect multifamily developments? You know, we're working mostly in multifamily low-income housing tax credit buildings. Like, how do these two kind of relate or interplay with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I had thought of it that way before. I mean, one of the things that I noticed, I had a chart up that was kind of what were rents over the last few years, and multifamily had a strong sort of decline in the early pandemic. Although, as I mentioned, not across all markets in the same way, but you know, there on average there was that decline, but it was much less pronounced for single family rental markets. And so I think that, you know, the demand is high for single family living, and it's hard to know exactly if that's because in places like Atlanta, you know, that's like what the majority of the housing stock is. Even in the city of Atlanta, I mean, you'll have 1 and 2 flats and things like that, but you know, it's a single family, you know, predominantly kind of market. Yeah, you know, I think that I don't know how else to think about a connection, but I think it's interesting to think more about what the relationship might be.
Yeah, I was just thinking offhandedly, like, obviously, when you have more investors who own single family homes and are renting them out, you also have a lot of people possibly who are maybe voucher holders trying to identify housing in the community, and they both are looking at low-income housing tax credit buildings, but also those single family homes if that's what they need, if they have a larger household. So it's an interesting relationship to see possibly how some of the shifting character of, you know, who owns single family properties, taking those properties off of the home buying market and shifting them entirely to rental and having more investors involved in that, and kind of that relationship and how far removed and a lot of those investors are from the people that they might be renting to. You know, it's like you were saying earlier with the shift that happened in with the one company that moved from you know, allowing for the federal government allowed for that company to make a lot of investments in single family homes. It's kind of it's interesting to think about. Just, it makes it seem like, honestly, the work of affordable housing is just even more essential because we have so many issues now where we don't have that available housing stock, you know, freed up in the market. And it's just neat, you know, having affordable housing dedicated to working with this population is important.
It just made me think that the voucher question that you raised, or I'll raise the question for the vouchers that you mentioned there, because at first, when kind of these larger corporations were buying single family rentals, some people asked, oh, maybe this will be good because large corporations will want to participate in the voucher program at scale. They don't have the hangups that smaller landlords might have larger portfolios, can be okay with the inspection taking a little bit longer, whatever has to happen administratively. Unfortunately, the research shows that those larger owners don't participate in voucher programs, which means it is, to your point, even more essential for the affordable housing system to be placing voucher holders and expand, many states, or increasingly we see more localities and states adopting source of income protections. Of course, those need to be enforced and encourage participation, but obviously being able to place voucher holders is critically important. And unfortunately, I think in most markets, it's really declining the success rate of being able to, I mean, you all would know better than I do, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know we're at 11:03, and I know that there were some questions. Could you hang on for like one more question, Ben? Is that okay?
Yeah, I can do one more. That would be
Okay. There was a question in the chat from Catherine. Is there any research being done on the degree of predatory home purchasing? Specifically, she was looking in Baltimore, which I could do a little research on that, but like, do you know of anything, Ben, offhand that, we could refer her to?
some of the best, work on these types of things are from like investigative journalists and not necessarily academic researchers, although there is some. So I don't have those in front of me, but I know outlets like ProPublica in Atlanta, the Atlanta Constitution Journal, or I'll have to double check on that. But there are some, a lot of these journalists who are doing the investigative work have really dug into that. I would say most of the academic work that I've seen, research, scholarship has looked at that contract selling piece because that was so unusual to see that, so unexpected to see that return. But it sounds like there's, a few things that maybe Chelsea and I can email after the session, get some resources together on these questions, and we can share as much as I can.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks so much, Ben, for joining us this morning. And I'm really happy that we had so many good questions. I kind of felt like we could just go on and on.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your time, and we'll send out some follow-up information to the group. The PowerPoint, I had a couple of questions about a community land trust list, which is something I'd have to get together for Maryland. And then also some questions that are more like Baltimore specific, which I'm happy to do what I can to provide that information. So hang tight, everyone. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to do the program update for the Maryland Partnership for Affordable Housing. So we'll be doing another presentation. So don't leave us quite yet. I'm going to give us about a 5-minute break, and then we're going to go ahead and proceed with doing the second half of this webinar this morning. So thanks, Ben. I appreciate your time, and I will see everyone again shortly. Just hold tight.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you. Take care.
You too. Bye. I am going to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. For those of you who are logged in, please be prepared to rejoin us around, we're going to restart around 11:10. So take a quick coffee break, bathroom break, whatever you need, and we will be back with you shortly. So thank you, everyone. All right. So I may have deceived everyone. I'm actually back at 11:11, so my apologies. I was just grabbing some coffee. All right, so that was a great presentation from Dr. Teresa, and now we're going to pivot a little bit and have our presentation on just a general program update on what the Maryland Partnership for Affordable Housing, or MPAH, has been working on for the last year. So I'm joined today by some of my colleagues who are critical team members in this effort. So I'll go ahead and just do some introductions here. We have Lakeisha Vaughn from the Department of Housing and Community Development, Marianne Graham from the Department of Health, and Christina Bulliard from the Maryland Department of Disabilities. I'm going to share my presentation now. So bear with me one moment. Okay. All right. So can everyone see that, the presentation?
Yes, looks
Okay.
good.
Very good. So we're going to go through this presentation. We do this annually, so none of this should be too surprising if you've been to our presentations in the past. For those of you who have questions, I'm going to hold that until the end. But if you want to, just kind of discuss generally anything related to these programs, you're welcome to use the chat feature in Zoom. I did re-enable that. I'm sorry, I don't know why it was disabled, but if you have specific questions, you can also use the Q&A. Just enter them in there and I'll start taking them once we get to the end of the presentation. Okay. Whoops. All right, so going to go over some reports that annually these are produced by two different entities. The Technical Assistance Collaborative, or TAC, produces a report called Priced Out. This is an annual report on housing for people with disabilities. It's nationwide, but they do break it down state by state. So provide some really helpful information for us to share at this meeting. SSI is currently $841 monthly, and statewide in Maryland, this is 12.3% of the area median income. A person with a disability, in order to afford an efficiency, would have to pay 138% of their monthly income. And for a one-bedroom unit, that's 150%. So this is a significant expense. And obviously, as we were talking about the single family market with Dr. Teresa's presentation, we're all very well aware that the multifamily market, finding affordable housing in that market is very tough, even for somebody who has a voucher. So right now, obviously, I'm sure as many of you are aware, HUD did make changes to the rent standards, essentially increasing the allowance, but it's still not quite enough for the people that we're working with, because we are working with people who are at 30% of the area median and below. So it's still quite difficult for people with disabilities to afford to rent on the private market. In the Baltimore-Columbia-Towson MSA, or Metropolitan Statistical Area, a person with a disability, they have to have 134% of their monthly SSI would be needed to rent a one-bedroom. And in Washington, Arlington, Alexandria, 186%. There's a link at the bottom of this page that will take you to the TAC website. You can view the whole report and take a look at some of the national numbers as well. Out of Reach is another report, and I apologize, I meant to include a link to that in this slide, so I'll make sure I get that in the chat for you all. This is a report produced by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They are advocates for housing programs nationwide, but they produce this report just to show how difficult it is for somebody to afford to rent on the private market. And I have a breakdown here of some Maryland statistics, specifically 1-bedroom fair market rent in Maryland is right now $1,262 a month. So when you think about it, somebody who's getting only $841 a month cannot afford that, obviously. And then in addition, affordable rent for a household receiving 30% of the statewide area median income. Again, this is, statewide, so it's going to look different if you're talking about specific areas. That amount is $921 a month. For an SSI recipient in Maryland, rent affordable, a rent amount that's affordable is $252 a month. So you can see here that there's some very clear discrepancies in the rental market, and it's currently only accelerating discrepancies where the cost of renting is just simply going up and up, and the available housing on the market is going down. So that's a trend that is being kind of realized nationwide, but then in Maryland as well, you can see some of the gaps there. So just to go over the 811 Project Rental Assistance Program in some detail, the goal for this program is to identify 400 permanent supportive housing units. Maryland has received 3 awards from HUD, and they total $27.9 million. Currently, we are working on getting the units identified for our fiscal year 19 funding, which will estimated amount of units to be funded by that is 100. Currently, we have 322 identified. And the main thing about the 811 program that makes it a bit unique is that the program is project-based rental assistance. It is located in low-income housing tax credit properties financed through the Department of Housing and Community Development. And it does have a requirement of integration. So no more than 25% of units in a tax credit property are designated for people with disabilities. Just to give a little context, the reason why this is so important is because we want to ensure that people transitioning out of institutional settings have the opportunity to live in the community, and also to interact in a way that they have that level of independence and that level of individual choice. So the Olmstead Act, which I believe many people on the call are probably familiar with, is one of the mandates that we really use as a guiding force for this program. The integration piece is critical to ensuring that we're not replicating an institutional-like setting in the community for a person with a disability. Eligible applicants, they do have to be between 18 to 62 at the time of leasing, have to meet the HUD definition of a disability, and they do have to be Maryland Medicaid recipients receiving long-term supports and services. So this could be individuals served through either supports planning agencies who are transitioning out of nursing facilities. Could also be individuals served in residential rehabilitation programs licensed by the Behavioral Health Administration, or individuals who are living in group homes who wish to live in a more independent option and are moving out of group homes that are located in the community. We also do, of course, serve individuals experiencing homelessness. That is another priority group for the 811 program. Individuals who are applying, they do have to have income at or below 30% of the area median income. That's inclusive of SSI level income. That is a standard requirement for our program. And of course, that amount is going to vary depending on where the individual wants to live. Consistent across the 811 program, the tenant always contributes 30% of their income for rent and utilities combined. This is considered, and from a national perspective, considered to be affordable. So these are standards that have been followed in every state, and individuals always contributing 30% of their income for the 811 PRA program. Okay, so here is our list of priority populations for the 811 program for those of you who are not familiar with them. So our first priority are individuals who are institutionalized Medicaid recipients. We also are prioritizing individuals who are at risk of institutionalization because perhaps they live in either substandard housing or they are homebound. We also, in our third priority group, individuals moving to independent renting. So it's going to be people who are in the DDA Community Pathways Waiver, perhaps in group homes, in residential rehabilitation programs. And our fourth priority group are homeless individuals who are also Medicaid recipients. Individuals experiencing chronic homelessness are by definition disabled. So we do have a lot of people who we've been able to house who are in this priority group as well. As you can see, there's a sub list there of different specific designations. In our waitlist registry, case managers are able to go in and actually indicate the person's specific situation as it relates to their homelessness that they're experiencing. Okay, so this gives you a sense of the HUD Section 811 award details. As I mentioned previously, we've received 3 awards through the HUD 811 program. Our first award was received in February of 2013. That was for 11 million. And then March 2015, we received 10 million. Then in November of 2020, we received 6.9 million from the HUD 811 program. Lakeisha, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the award details or if you had anything you wanted to add to this slide.
Sure. So with the most recent award, we were awarded $6.9 million. And we are planning to identify at least 93 units with the most recent award. Did you want me to talk about the projects here, or you want to wait for another slide?
We can, when we get to the project slide, that would be like, I think that's a good spot to kind of discuss a little bit further about what we're working on with respect to that.
Sure.
Sounds good. Okay, well, I can
Thanks.
make an update to this slide too. Moving along. Okay, so Christina, would you like to talk a little bit more regarding the 811 successes for the last year?
Sure. So since our last meeting in October of 2021, we have housed 59 families over the last year in the following 8 properties. We housed individuals at 22 Light Street in Baltimore City, Benson's Corner in Harford County, Calvert Hills in Calvert County, Flamingo Place in Baltimore City, Renaissance Row in Baltimore City, Robinson Overlook in Howard County, Town Courts in Anne Arundel County, Westminster Way in Carroll County, and right now we are currently leasing up 3 units at Gateway at Peerless, which is in Prince George's County. And there are a total of 288 families that are currently living in our Section 811 units.
All right, very good. Thanks, Christina. Move along to the next slide here. Okay, so this is some demographic information I just wanted to share. It's pulled from our waitlist data. As many of you might be familiar with, we have an online portal that's administered through SocialServe. And what that portal does is when you register and create an account through the portal as a case manager, you can enter in a client's information. And upon entering in that information, the portal will actually tell you what programs that client qualifies for. In addition, though, we do ask some demographic information when you're entering in the client's information, and that's where these specific numbers come from. So since the program started, we've had 380 residents in the program. As Christina mentioned, there's 288 currently living in units in the 811 program. Sorry, the controls are at the top and I can't see that. Okay. 137 individuals have transitioned from institutions, 85 from RRPs, group homes, or similar settings. We've had 118 persons who were homeless who moved into 811 units, and 29 persons who reported unstable housing. Probably the greatest increase we've seen actually is in the number of homeless individuals that we've been able to house through this program. I believe that a lot of that has to do with some partnerships that we have with both the Interagency Council on Homelessness. I serve as the secretary's kind of assistant or designee for that group. And in addition to that, I've also been working a lot with the balance of state continuum of care. And they have had some great questions about the 811 program and also how to better partner with homeless service providers to get them the information they need about the disability services system, which I think is pretty critical. Reported disabilities include physical, behavioral, developmental. You can see here the highest percentage we still have of individuals being housed are those with physical disabilities. The reason why this is important is because we certainly have a lack of accessible units statewide. That goes for both private and affordable housing. And there's certainly a need for us to produce and look at the options we have available to us to build more accessibility into housing, generally speaking, across the board. 56% of people have reported a need for an accessible unit. That's going to look different depending on the person. Obviously, there's some people who simply need something like grab bars installed in the shower, but then we also have people in the program who really need a roll-in shower in order to actually use the shower. So these are all things that we look at, particularly when we're working with the low-income housing tax credit developers and property management, just so that way they understand that this is a huge need still for our population, and any accessibility they can build into units is certainly ideal. Still, this information hasn't changed from last year. We've only had 11 people reporting military service and 3 people reporting limited English proficiency. I certainly think that it would be helpful for us to build more partnerships in the future, connecting to entities like the VA and also groups that serve individuals who are Spanish speaking or whose first language is not English, so we can get more outreach to eligible populations and make sure that we're letting people know that this is a resource for them. Okay, Lakeisha, would you like to talk a little bit about this slide?
Sure. Good morning again, everyone. So this slide actually shows the properties that have been developed under the Section 811 program. And we have, I believe, 3 additional projects that will be coming on board in the next year to between 2023 and 2024. Additionally, we also have under the current award 3 new projects that will be awarded. And those projects are in Howard County. So we have Artist Flats coming on board. We will be, that is a 72 unit mixed income community in Howard County. And they're awarded 5 units, and we have actually requested 2 UFAST units. So again, going back to just the need for accessible housing units, we have an additional project in Anne Arundel County. It's the Willows at Forest, which is a 58 unit multifamily in Annapolis, where 8 units are being created for persons with disabilities. 6 of those units will be 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms. Additionally, we've requested at least 3 UFAST units. And then lastly, we have a project, Magnolia Gardens, which is a 72 unit mixed income community in Charles County, where they will be awarded 3 units, 2 1-bedroom and 1 2-bedroom unit with at least 1 UFAS. So we certainly understand the need for additional accessible units. And our goal is, to continue to work with our developers to continue to create units that are accessible for our population. Thank you.
Thanks, Lakeisha. That's great news. And I do want to point out too that the Magnolia Gardens project is the first one that I believe we have units in for Charles County. We don't have any other projects down there, so that's a big deal and really exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the unit selection process, kind of like what Lakeisha was just talking about. Obviously, we have a number of different projects that are in the pipeline, and I'm sure some people who might be new to 811 don't really know how we make those decisions about what units in LIHTC projects actually receive 811 units. So we do have an interagency committee that reviews locations and also number of units. We try to, obviously include all of our MPAH partners in this process. Typically what happens is there's a meeting between DHCD, MDH, and MDOD. And occasionally we do actually consult with some of the Maryland Centers for Independent Living, particularly if the project is in an area that the contacts within our different agencies are unsure of, accessibility of things like transportation, healthcare resources, et cetera. We're certainly looking for projects, of course, that have better access to transit, better access to healthcare and job opportunities for our population. So we're always kind of focusing on those objectives as well. We do look for, of course, in our waitlist registry, which is why it is such a great resource, we're looking for unit demand. So we can run a report on our waitlist system and determine how many individuals would want to live in, for example, a 1-bedroom unit in Howard County. And this is information that we take and use as guidance when we're assessing whether or not a project is appropriate for the program. So oftentimes when DHCD identifies a project that could be a good fit, we're looking at that information, running a report, and just ensuring that that is actually where the demand is. So that's why it's even more important if you have people on the wait list and you're a case manager, make sure that you update their interest, because that definitely helps us with better identifying where a unit should be located. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the Weinberg Apartments program. So this program is unique. It's a philanthropically funded program. Some of you might be familiar with the Weinberg Foundation. They primarily work in the Baltimore metropolitan area, and this is primarily where the units are located for this program. It was initially funded in 2011, so this predates the 811 program. And currently we have 32 families living in Weinberg units. Again, this is a partnership of the 3 state agencies that are presenting on this call. Initially, we received $2 million for the first grant, and the area median income level for individuals in the program was targeting those at 15 to 30% of AMI. So unlike the 811 program, individuals in the Weinberg program do have to have some income. They have to, if they're living in a unit that's funded through Weinberg 1, through the first grant, it's the 15 to 30% of area median that they must fulfill. If they are living in a unit funded by the second grant, which we received in August of 2016, another $2 million, the income targeting is actually from 10 to 30% of area median. So a little bit of a different income range. And of course, the waitlist system, this is why it's so helpful for us, because we can run a report and we can get a whole list of people whose income would would meet the requirements for this program. That's again another reason why it's important to keep the individual's application updated in the wait list, even if they haven't been called for a housing opportunity, because then we can know exactly how many people meet the criteria of the program and how many people are we going to be looking at contacting for the housing opportunity. In 2020, we were awarded additional $3 million of funding for development of more rental units in this program. We have 13 units identified currently. Just to review eligibility, very similar to 811, but there are some key differences, again, with the income requirements as listed here. Individuals also have to be disabled, receiving SSI and or an SSDI cash payment. One thing I do want to point out, and this is a requirement across any low-income housing tax credit property, so you will see this regardless of what property it is. The individual cannot have criminal background indicating a lifetime sex offense registry marker on their background, and they cannot have been convicted of production of methamphetamine on federally assisted property. So that's pretty critical and is a requirement regardless of what low-income housing tax credit building the person is living in. Regarding unit identification and also when we're evaluating priority for this specific program, these are the different criteria that we're looking at. So it's a little bit different than 811 in the sense that, you know, we don't have strict priority categories that we've set aside primarily because this is a philanthropically funded program. So the criteria and the requirements are going to be different from the HUD grant that we have. But as you can see here, similar criteria in the sense that we're really looking for people who have, you know, a need for an accessible unit, people with multiple disabilities, individuals who are institutionalized or homeless, or those who are at risk of homelessness. We of course assess for things like readiness to move and also the date and time of application to the wait list. Just want to touch upon this briefly. When we run a report to see who might be eligible to apply for a unit, say, you know, we have a unit we're leasing in Anne Arundel County. We want to take a look at the list of eligible individuals who want to live in a 1-bedroom unit in Anne Arundel County, hypothetically. Our waitlist registry will not only sort the person by priority category, it also sorts them based on date and time stamp of their application. So the algorithm in the system, it organizes individuals based on that way. So it is really helpful for us as we go through the leasing process and we are making referrals to the property. Unit selection for this program, they do have to have, the development has to have financing through DHCD. Of course, the low-income housing tax credit program is where we locate units for this. And the actual property has to have nonprofit involvement. So usually a nonprofit partner or developer is involved in the project as well. For our third grant, we did have some extra priority groups that the foundation is interested in housing. You can see here that there's a focus specifically on transitioning youth who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and are between the ages of 18 and 35, living with an aging caregiver in a group home setting or transitioning from permanent supportive housing. So this is a population we are still trying to identify and do outreach for. We have met with DDA to talk a little bit more about where they might recommend us doing outreach to get a sense of the aging caregivers that are that have adult children in services right now. That's been very helpful. However, we're always looking to expand our outreach for this population. It is a bit of a difficult population to identify because they may or may not be accessing services. So that is a key population the foundation wants us to target for these units. We are also looking at individuals and families who are homeless. We have many individuals who are homeless on our waitlist registry already, who are trying to find an apartment through the Weinberg program. And additionally, youth aging out of foster care who are disabled and homeless or at risk of homelessness. So over the last year, we've done presentations for DHS, the Department of Human Services, and they have a peer group that meets regularly that has individuals who manage caseloads of foster care youth transitioning out of their foster care setting into independent living. Okay, MFP bridge subsidy. Mariam, would you like to hop on and talk about this?
I certainly would. Thank you, Chelsea, and good morning, everyone. So the Money Follows the Person Bridge Subsidy is a program that was initiated with $2.5 million from Money Follows the Person rebalancing funds. Rebalancing funds is money from that the state gets back when people who are in nursing facilities transition into the community. So it's a cost savings program that the federal government provides. So we were able to use $2.5 million for this program. And in terms of eligibility, the person must be eligible for the Money Follows the Person program. So that means that they need to be involved in one of the or trying to become involved in one of the home and community-based services programs, like the Community Options Waiver, Community Pathways Waiver, or on the state plan, the Community First Choice Plan. And that involves their supports planner, completing Money Follows the Person questionnaire in our long-term services and supports LTSS system, and them having a signed consent form. They must have been in a nursing facility for at least 60 days, and at least one of those days needs to have been paid for by long-term care Medicaid. So they are, if they're eligible for Money Follows the Person, they can also be a brain injury waiver participant, transitioning from an alternative living unit, or a DDA participant in the Community Pathways Waiver, transitioning from a group home or alternative living unit, or a Community Options Waiver participant who's been living in an assisted living facility and now is attempting to move back into the community for independent renting. So for our program, they just have to be 18 years. There's no upper age limit, so they just have to be 18 years or older. They have to have a household income of $19,000 or less, and they have to meet the same requirements of HUD and the Public Housing Authority that Chelsea mentioned before, the not being on a lifetime sex offender registry and not having produced methamphetamine on a federally assisted property. So the bridge subsidy is a tenant-based rental assistance. So it's similar to the housing choice voucher. So the tenant pays 30% of their income toward rent and utilities, and then the rental subsidy is up to the fair market rent and is paid to the landlord through the Public Housing Authority. So rental assistance is through the bridge subsidy is paid for up to 3 years. And then the person will transition to either a housing choice voucher, or in some cases, another project-based housing situation, or public housing, depending on the participating jurisdiction. And so, you know, this is a program where supports planners typically, because the person is involved in one of the home and community-based services programs, so they have a supports planner, and the supports planner helps them apply for the program, search for housing, and fill out the applications and documentation needed or required by the Public Housing Authority and the landlord. Next slide, please. Okay, so when the program was first started, we had a number of jurisdictions provide commitments. And so over time, some of the jurisdictions have kind of met their commitment and so are no longer actually participating in the program. But right now, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City, and Baltimore County are active and participating in the program. They are highlighted in yellow because we are still working with them to determine how many openings are still available, because a number of referrals have been made, but not every referral results in someone actually leasing up. And since there's been some program changes in terms of staff, some of the people that were working on the program are no longer at those public housing authorities. So it's, you know, a matter of trying to connect and determine exactly the number of commitments that we have. Again, Carroll County, Easton, St. Michael's, Hagerstown, Hartford all have openings as well. And it's kind of the same situation. We continually are working with the public housing authorities to determine how many people have actually leased up and how many people have transitioned. And some counties are more open to exceeding the commitment that they initially made than others. Obviously, Howard, Montgomery, and Prince George's County are highly desired locations. So they all have met their initial commitments and are no longer accepting referrals from this program at this time. And then, you know, we do have some in St. Mary's, and then through DHCD, some on the Eastern Shore and some out west in Frederick and Hagerstown areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so to date, we have 63 households that have been housed, and currently there are 38 households in the program. And I believe, I was looking for the number for this, but I'm not sure. I actually think the number of households that have transitioned to housing choice vouchers or project-based housing, I believe that's actually increased, but I couldn't find the exact number when I was doing this slide. So, oh, and this is actually not the updated slide that I provided. This is from last year, but that's okay. So these are last year's numbers, but actually between September 2021 and September 2022, there were just 9 referrals made to the Bridge Subsidy Program. And a number of them were for Baltimore County, a few for Baltimore City. We had, I believe, 1 or 2 for Hagerstown, 1 for St. Mary's County. And so, you know, we've been experiencing a lack of transitions, a smaller number of transitions. And I think that is the pandemic is still impacting that. And there may be other factors which we're looking into to kind of figure out how we can increase transitions. Next slide. Okay, so I think that I'll turn this back over to you, Chelsea.
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. I thought I had the updated slide, but when I send out the PowerPoints from today to attendees, I'll make sure that the updated slide is in there for people to refer to.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. So just to go over some of the local partnerships that we are working on right now under the Maryland Partnership for Affordable Housing. Of course, we have the Community Choice Homes program in Montgomery County. Some of you might be familiar with this program. It is a partnership between us and the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. These specific units, there's 30 of them in this program, and they are located in real estate that is owned by the housing authority. So when we work on identifying units for the program, we're looking at the real estate portfolio that the housing authority owns. They do have a live-work preference for this program. So applicants must live or work in the county at the time of referral or lived or worked within 5 years of referral and currently live in an institution or group living setting. So when you have an applicant who is being screened for eligibility for any of the programs that we offer, When you enter their information into the wait list, they are also screened for eligibility for this program. So it's not a separate application. If they qualify, then they are added to this wait list as well. And the system will tell you that once you enter the person's information in. Disability income housing units. This is a program that we are partnering with Howard County on. It is not a program that we have fully launched as of yet. However, the program itself is intended to create accessible units or affordable and hopefully accessible units and projects that are for people with disabilities. The person has to have an income at or below 20% of the area median for Howard County. Right now, we don't have any sort of registry specific to this program. And currently we are just working on determining projects that would be a good fit for the program where we can locate units. Currently, over the last year, we've done a lot of collaboration with Prince George's County and Baltimore County on increasing accessible and affordable housing in both regions. So this is very exciting, and we're hoping that we can continue expanding our local partnerships to be able to increase the amount of accessible housing for people with disabilities in different counties in the state. Okay, so here is the contact information. For some of us that we're speaking today, I can provide Christina Bolliard's contact information in the chat. I know we're kind of ending this presentation a little early, but I'm willing to, take questions that anyone might have regarding the presentation. Okay. And I'm putting Christina's contact information in the chat. Did anyone have any questions? You can put them in the Q&A. I did have a question from Catherine O'Bannon, which I did answer, about how do people in various groups apply? If in the community, do they apply directly to the site? So again, we have a waitlist registry system. The person applying does have to have a case manager help them apply. They cannot directly apply through our waitlist registry. The case manager contacts our office and we review and ensure that the individual is providing case management to the applicant. Upon us reviewing and approving that person for accessing our waitlist registry, we go ahead and assist them with just getting information on setting up an account. Individual applicants don't apply directly to sites. How this works is that they input their information into the registry. When we do have a housing opportunity, we run a sort of the list based on the type of housing opportunity and where it's located. Individuals in the waitlist registry indicate what type of unit they're looking for, whether it be a 1 or 2 bedroom. And they also indicate up to 5 counties that they might want to live in. So when we sort the waitlist, that's what we're sorting on. And so once we receive that full list, that's when we start reaching out to people. And when we reach out to people, we're contacting the case managers. So they are going to be getting an email from Christina, and Christina explains the housing opportunity. And then from there, we get all of the application documents over to the properties that are leasing up these 811 units or Weinberg units. Looks like I have some people in the chat. Okay. Do I have any other questions? And I will ensure that people get the updated PowerPoint with information on MFP bridge numbers for this current year. Okay, looks like I have a hand raised. Okay, I have allowed you to talk, Katrina.
Hey, Doctor, thank you so much. Is it possible if I can also get this PowerPoint too as well, so I can have a reference? And then if I can have someone contact me because I do have one person so far, but I have 2 more people that I like to add that have disabilities. And to triage them is just, they've been sick. So once I'm able to get them to a place where I can triage them, put them in the system, and move forward, can I please have someone contact me to ensure that I'm doing it correctly?
So what happens is when you reach out, as long as you're providing case management to these individuals, again, you have to be providing case management to these individuals to add them to the wait list.
I am, and
So,
I'm already in the system. I've
okay,
actually added one person so far successfully. So I'm happy about that. I just want to be able to add the other people that are in need, and then to kind of really learn and navigate the system a little more. That's why this was so important for me to attend.
so I definitely encourage you to, if you're not already registered for getting emails about any training that we offer, please consider attending those trainings. Because, you know, we obviously do our due diligence in reaching out to people who need assistance with navigating the wait list, but the best opportunities are to attend the larger trainings that we offer as a partnership. So, you know, I'm happy to, I'm sure Christina is able to kind of assist, but if you have somebody's information inputted in there, we can simply check on the application and just make sure we have all that we need. You know, we have a general housing inbox with MDOD that you can send an email to, and either myself or Christina typically is the one who monitors that inbox and will respond to any requests or inquiries that you might have. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. All of our contact information is here, so please reach out to us if you have questions. Does anyone have any other questions that you might want to have answered? I'm gonna close this presentation.
How fast is the turnover? Once they've been selected, how fast is the turnover process?
You mean the leasing process?
Yes.
So typically very quick. I mean, what happens is when a person is offered an opportunity to apply, they're not the only person offered that opportunity to apply. So we reach out to, it could be up to like 3 to 5 individuals from the wait list that could be eligible for a housing opportunity. So what we do is when we have that initial outreach, we ask for a number of documents from the case manager, and providing those as quickly as possible is ideal. So, you know, this is where, as a case manager, you want to have certain documents ready for the individual who's, you know, leasing up the unit. So that's going to be an ID, you know, information on bank statements or Social Security award letters, things like that. To set the person up for success, you want to make sure that all of that information is up to date and that they have it, because it goes by very quickly. These properties have deadlines that they have in order to meet leasing requirements for their tax credit requirements. So, you know, the best way to help the person that you're working with is to stay on top of emails and phone calls from Christina, because she's going to be asking for that information and then giving updates to the property.
Thank you so much. And I put my information in the chat. So I would love for Christina to call me when she have a chance, so I can go over and make sure that I'm doing the right thing, because I really don't want to be working with them hand and foot, looking for housing with them, filling out applications, paying for application fees, doing the whole 9 yards. And I just want to make sure that I'm doing right by them. So I don't want to mess up anything for them.
Yeah, I really encourage you to reach out to us though, because we have quite a number of, it's only myself and Christina working on the actual process of like interacting with properties and doing the leasing piece. So please reach out to us. It's much easier for us to get contact from you, so that way we're able to respond. So just send us a quick email, and that way we can get back to you. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want to add in a couple of things real quick, because I kind of interpreted the question differently as far as the leasing, how quick can somebody get housed? So just to let everybody know, there's roughly about 1,700 people on the wait list. That's not to discourage anybody from putting their clients onto the wait list, but if there's roughly about another 100 units to be identified or for the lease up process for this program, 100 people, 100 units and 1,700 applications, you can kind of see where we're going. We don't give out timeframes for when or if someone would ever be housed through this program, because this wait list is for the entire state. Yes, individuals, when you're applying, you can put people in 5 counties, 5 jurisdictions, but the wait list is, it includes all of those counties in the city. So it's hard to give out wait list numbers. It's hard to give out, how long somebody's going to be housed and things like that. Just kind of like as an aside, please don't have your clients call me and ask when they're going to get housed or what their wait list number is, because it's information that we just don't have. It's impossible to
Absolutely.
give, that information.
Yeah, I don't give any information out at all.
No,
I
no,
let
I
them
mean,
know clearly.
I'm not saying you
Yeah,
specifically. I'm just saying in
yeah,
general to
in general.
everybody that's on the call. And like I said, you can see from the numbers that are on the list and the numbers that Lakeisha gave for upcoming properties. When we have a property that we're working with, it's not the entire property. It's not the 70 or 140 units. We may have 5 or 7, 3. I mean, like right now we have 3 at Gateway at Peerless. So 3 units on a wait list of 1,700 people. We don't do a whole lot of outreach. So just to kind of let you know that it could be a long process. Your clients may never get housed, but your clients could get housed. I mean, it's just a lot of information. When Chelsea and I learn of housing opportunities that come up with other counties, other jurisdictions, we try to send that information out so that there are other opportunities for individuals to get housed through another type of program. And I just wanted to throw in there, because Chelsea, I heard you going over the list of the necessary documentation, and I want to just stress how important it is to have a valid ID or driver's license. It will, if that is an expired ID or driver's license that gets sent in, the application's not going anywhere. Properties will not process an application without one that is current and valid. Same
What if
thing
they
with a
don't
social security
drive?
card. I mean, those are just vital documents. These aren't things that are being requested of, just from this program. They would need it,
Mhm.
if they were applying on their own, if they just walked in off the street. So just to make sure that those vital documents that Chelsea had gone over and that
Mhm.
ID and social security card are very important for the beginning process.
What about a passport? Is that eligible? Because I have a elder that is 62 years old with disability, with that is disabled, and when they relocated him from Jersey to the state of Maryland, they lost all of his paperwork. And I've been working with the Congress department, and we were able to find his nationalization paperwork and his passport. So we're working on trying to get a state ID in the meantime for Howard County. But could we use his passport?
If the passport is valid, if it's current
Yes.
and not expired, it should not be a problem.
Okay.
Some properties may not accept it, but most of the ones that we've worked with for 811 have accepted passports.
Okay. Thank you.
So I've got a lot of questions about documentation. This is not a session where we're going to go too in depth with that. And just to give you guys some information, we offer trainings about documentation, about application materials that are needed. So I encourage you to, again, If you're not on our mailing list, please sign up because we will send out notices about upcoming trainings that will go over documentation needed for the housing programs that we work on. So I do want to try to kind of wrap things up. Are there any remaining questions that that people might have? Someone's asking about, okay, yes, a birth certificate is required for all household members. That was the question that we received in the chat. Thanks, Christina, for answering that one. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending our first session of the annual Property Manager Case Manager meeting. Our next session is going to be on Wednesday, October 12th, so next Wednesday, from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. We will be hosting Eva Rosen, who is the author of a book called The Voucher Promise. This book documents the lives of individuals who are recipients of a housing choice voucher and living in Baltimore City's Park Heights neighborhood. So if you're not already familiar with her work, I did in the initial Constant Contact link folks to her website to get a sense of what her research is about. So she'll be talking about her book, and please come prepared with some questions for the speaker. In addition, we will be facilitating a special topic in case management as part of this discussion, the second half of the discussion after Dr. Rosen has done her presentation. Marion Graham and I were talking about some of the psychological aspects of transition and return to the community. We're going to be looking at issues around community integration and community connectedness, which actually kind of ties in very well with Dr. Rosen's research that she's done on voucher holders in Baltimore City. So come prepared with some ideas about that if you're working in case management or in property management, and we'll have a really interesting discussion and hopefully learn a little bit more from each other. So thanks everyone for attending this morning, and I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon. Take care.